The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I am the host, Andy Steele, and this week we are launching Operation Reason. We're going to be using the World Trade Center evidence to affect our world today, and we're going to be reaching out to members of Congress and the Science and Commerce Committees in order to bring them the World Trade Center evidence. We're going to be holding them accountable like never before because we are at the precipice right now. It is scary times. We're actually worried about nuclear war. It's not some concept that people had to worry about decades ago. We are worrying about it today, and we're going to do our part to prevent it, to try to bring this evidence that we've been beating the drum about for, 15 years in my part, for so long, and bring it to the people that have the ability to do something with it. And truly, 9/11 Truth can change the world. And we're looking at the broader world now. 9/11 had a huge impact on world events, on what the United States did in the aftermath of it. And we got a great guest today who can shed some light on that, very involved in political activism and activism in other countries. His name is Paul Larudee. He's an Iranian-born American political activist who's a major figure in the pro-Palestinian movement. Based in the San Francisco Bay Area, he is involved with international solidarity movement and was a founder of the Free Gaza movement and the Free Palestine movement, along with so many other movements and projects, such as Free Gaza Movement, the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, International Community on Cuba, the Association for Investment and Popular Action Committee. So basically, he's an all-star activist, and he agrees with us about 9/11. So we're going to be learning more about him and his action-packed activist career. Paul, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. And I mean, just going over your entire history, I got the rundown on it. Obviously, I'm going to be getting more details from you, but you have really been through the ringer trying to make the world a better place. And we're going to be getting into some of those stories. But just to start us off, tell us about your background, about being born in Iran, how you came to be here in the United States, and how you first got involved in activism.
Okay, well, my father was an Iranian national who married an American missionary in Iran. That was my mother. And he became a Presbyterian minister. So he did not fit the mold that he was made into. He made his own mold. And that's, to some extent, a tradition in the family. I'm not the only one by any means, so he emigrated to the United States when I was, well, actually he did it twice. He did it when I was an infant and again at age 5, But then from then on, pretty much until I was into my 20s, I lived in the U.S. We lived in many places in the U.S. So the U.S. was familiar to me. I considered myself an American. My native language growing up was English. So I just felt American as anybody else. I began to learn that a lot of things that we see in the world, especially politically speaking, are not the way they appear on the surface. And so that's one of the reasons we started this group. Initially, it started out to support the movement in Palestine because the real story about Palestine was not being told. And it needed something to, those of us who were involved in it wanted to do what we could in order to bring this story to the American people. And I think to some extent, we and many other groups succeeded in doing that because it's a lot more active today than it was 20 years ago, let's say. My first connection to it was in 1965, so which is when I first went to Palestine. But I can tell you that not a lot happened between 1965 and, let's say, arbitrarily 2000 or 2005, 2010. But ever since that time, it's changed. Eventually, it changed, and so it can be done. And that's the way. And we got involved in much more than, as you read off the list of the projects that we had. You can see that we've been involved in Latin America and in Syria, and we haven't actually opened a project on Russia and Ukraine, but it's certainly the truth isn't being told there either. So it needs a lot of that. And our architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth was clearly in that mold. So I was attracted to that through my good friend Kamal Abeid, of course.
Yeah, Kamal Abeid, a great guy to work with. Happy to have him here at AE, a tremendous asset to us. And we're going to be talking about Palestine. I don't get an opportunity to do that very often on the show, and I'm no expert by any means. I have watched things. I've watched stuff by John Pilger, a very great journalist who has covered a variety of different topics. And I was actually following the flotillas back in the day when those were going on. We'll be talking about that as well. Because we are AE 9/11 Truth, our main issue here, of course, is controlled demolition. I've been hearing so much about your adventures and your activism and everything, but I want to know, why do you personally question 9/11 and the fall of the towers on that day?
Well, I'm probably not the first to say this, but when I saw the towers go down on the television screen, like so many other people, I said, what? They're going straight down? Like a controlled demolition? That's weird. But what do I know? That I had that reaction. It wasn't the predominant reaction I had at the time. But then when I saw Building 7 go down, then without any plane hitting it, and for no apparent reason, it just made no sense. After all, controlled demolition of a building is not a simple thing, but it has a very clear, let's say, MO. It comes down into its own footprint. It falls in on itself. That is something that demolition by explosion never does. You have to have tiny little explosions, well planned at the joints. I don't need to tell you. You've probably said this 1,000 times, but that question was in my mind, and I guess in a way I was waiting for the question to be asked and investigated, and AE for 9/11 Truth has done that. But it's obvious to anybody who's seen a controlled demolition. And a lot of people have. They have seen them very often. They make good video for the evening news. It's something spectacular to watch. But why would a couple of planes cause this kind of demolition? So and it goes from there. But we don't need to say this is an exceptional event. In a sense, it is exceptional, of course. It doesn't happen every day. But there have been so many other events that are similar in type or in usage. That is some sort of event that is used, like a Black Flag event or something like this, in order to mobilize public opinion to start a war. This is by no, it's the battleship Maine in the harbor of Havana in the Spanish-American War. It's the Lusitania in World War I. It's all sorts of things that are used. It's the Gulf of Tonkin event and so on. I mean, it's a very common way of starting a war. It's the method behind it has been around for thousands of years, and it's the opposite of telling the truth. You have to tell a lot of lies and fabricate a lot of stuff and try to cover it up, and that's what they do. So it just was a normal thing for me to be skeptical about it. We in the U.S. Tend to be not as skeptical as the people in other countries. For example, in Italy and France, I can name right away, and those who have lived under an occupation of some kind, like the Irish, for example, you don't trust your own government. You may have voted for it, but you still don't trust them. You expect them to be corrupted and devious and all this sort of thing. So, but we in the States, unfortunately, are not skeptical enough about what our government does. So anyway, that's my story.
Yeah, it is very common to come up with some kind of either fabricated event or exaggerated or whatever, but to come up with some kind of polarizing circumstance to try to drive people into the agendas of their leaders or quote unquote elites that run governments all over the world. This is very common throughout history. However, most Americans were not aware of this up until like the last 20 years or so, thanks to the internet and efforts like of people like activists like yourselves, like AE 9/11 Truth. More people are coming awake. And now we're at a very interesting time in our history where so many people are awake and our government doesn't know how to handle it except to censor and shut up and not address any of these concerns. We see this just in our own work with the science of the building demolitions that happened that day, the way that NIST goes into bunker mentality when they're feeling threatened. We're not actually threatening them, but they feel threatened by our challenges to their reports, and they just say they stand by their findings without addressing any of our points. How long can this go on? How long can this status quo take place? And I always say this, I find a way to say it every single show. We proved this case 10 years ago. Anything new that we find evidence-wise is just icing on the cake at this point. However, we have the government and mainstream media establishments refusing to acknowledge this, or refusing to do what they should be doing by publicizing this evidence and acting upon it. And there has been consequences, of course, here in the United States of America, but on the entire world as well. And I think some of the people who suffered the worst consequences of our inability to address this evidence are people in the Middle East. So I guess that leads into my next question. In your view, our nation's inability to acknowledge what really happened on that day, what has been the biggest consequence?
I guess it should be a leading question, but before I begin to answer that, let me just mention that it's a coincidence that only about a week ago, 10 days ago, I published an article in Dissident Voice, which was called Free Press. Free Press. And I can't even think of the title of it anymore. But it's about looking at the point of view of your adversary, to try to understand the other side of the question. We don't do that. We never ever do that. We're deluged by propaganda. That's the second word, propaganda, and censorship. And the first, as Aeschylus said, more than 2,500 years ago, he said, in war, the first casualty, truth is the first casualty. And that's what happens even before the war starts. And that's, so the idea is to mobilize the public, provide a lie, deny the other point of view. Let's take Ukraine, for example. We used to have RT, which used to be called Russia Today in this country. It was a Russian channel, but it was mostly American topics and Americans who couldn't get onto mainstream television that were on that. It was very useful and very interesting. As soon as the Ukraine war started, it was gone. And the same is true of the press of other countries. We do not hear the voices of the people that we intend to destroy. It's as simple as that. We bring in other people who will tell us what we're supposed to think about. So, but coming back to your issue of why this, actually, I guess I partly answered the question of why these things are done and why they're needed. It's the purpose is to get, as Noam Chomsky said, to manufacture consent. To manufacture consent. To get the population and even the leaders of the population to back what you want to do. That's basically it. So if you ask, for example, who's responsible for 9/11? Well, I won't be very precise, but I will say that the American government had to have a very deep involvement in it, as it has had in similar situations like the Gulf of Tonkin and so forth. It has to be deeply involved, and you can sort of pin it down to the CIA, because that's what we have now. They didn't have it with the battleship Maine, but they had something equivalent to it. So that it's important for our awareness and for our ability to govern ourselves. For us, was it Thomas Jefferson who said, it was one of the founding fathers that said that in order for a democracy to function, and I don't know when we're still working towards a democracy or working away from it, I don't know. But in order for it to function, it depends on an informed electorate, an informed public. And that's exactly what is being taken from us. It's exactly what those who wish to control us are trying to take away from us. So, this is the problem. And AE 9/11 is the organization, one of the organizations that's working to correct that, and so are we. So the Association for Investment in Popular Action Committees is attempting to do that, and all its projects. Its project, the Free Gaza Movement, the Free Palestine Movement, the International Solidarity Movement, the Serena Shim Award. Maybe you didn't run across that one. The Serena Shim Award is an award for journalists who tell the other side of the story. And we have more than 50 journalists or alternative journalism or organizations that have been presented with the award. We've given out more than $500,000 to help support these journalists. You can find it at serenashimaward.org. And this is so this is something that we try to foster. We try to present the other point of view.
Well, I was planning to ask you about that, and I think it's absolutely just and noble to be creating awards like this, because honestly, like, honest journalism is very hard to come by in this world. Yes, you can get a bunch of actors on TV, and when I say they're actors, I don't mean that the people aren't who they say they are, but they're really just selling you a product. They're selling the people at home an agenda. But to actually get somebody on the ground who goes into the war zones or whatever, where the flood happens or whatever news event is taking place, and actually present the real story without any bias, that is hard to come by, and sometimes it is dangerous. Can you please tell our audience this award, Serena Shim, who was this person, and yeah, basically, who was she?
Well, that's on our website, some details about that. But Serena Shim was a young woman she's an American Lebanese or Lebanese American who was a reporter for Press TV, the Iranian English language program. They had broadcast in other languages as well. And she was, if you like, exposing what was happening in Syria, or on the border, especially on the border between Syria and Turkey at the time. And she reported. She was an eyewitness to humanitarian aid vehicles being used to take, you could say, terrorists and arms, but basically armed fighters and arms from Turkey into Syria. And she reported on things that she was not supposed to report on. That is to say that the government of Turkey, especially, and presumably the terrorists themselves, did not like her revealing what they were doing. And we don't know exactly who caused her death, but we do know that she said on the air, "I wonder if I'm in danger because I've been warned by the Turkish secret police about what I'm doing." And 2 days later, she was dead. And she was dead. She was involved in an accident. She and her driver had a minor accident, really. And she ended up on the side of the road. She was taken to one hospital. Her driver was taken to another. And after she got to the hospital, she didn't survive. So, and from all reports, she wasn't injured that much when she went to the hospital. So this is a matter of, we have given awards to people who report in the same spirit as Serena. And they risk their lives to get the news in Bolivia, in Ukraine, or parts of Ukraine that are now Russia, and this sort of thing. They do that. They risk their income, their career, the ability to see their family, and they risk their necks in doing this.
Getting back to Palestine, I've been watching archives of September 11th in the past couple of days. And, we've watched a lot of day of 9/11 coverage, but I've been watching like within a few days after 9/11 coverage to see if there's any other information, engineers and all that. And there was a video that got put out on 9/11 claiming to be Palestinians celebrating the attacks. Turns out it was something completely different. I can't remember if it was a wedding or a soccer game, but it was something completely different. But here it is now. I'm watching last night, and this is a few days after 9/11, and they're still running this tape. Now, for a big time journalism organization like ABC News, to continue to make a mistake. They claim that, the first time it was a mistake, but if this went on for a few days, obviously there was an agenda here to paint the Palestinians in a negative light by running this tape. I just want to get first of all, are you aware of this? But if you are aware of it, I want to get your take on that and how people in the Middle East were portrayed in the aftermath of September 11th and in the shadow of this agenda that we saw unfold there from the United States.
A lot of Middle Easterners in the U.S. or Middle Easterners or people who just looked Middle Eastern were beaten up. They were harassed. I believe one was killed, but he was a Sikh, if I remember correctly, and all of this sort of thing. And yes, the story continues about Palestinians celebrating, but there were celebrations about the falling of 9/11. But they were celebrations that took place in New Jersey. And the people who were celebrating were not Americans. They were Israelis, so-called Israeli students. They were celebrating. And some people reported them and said, what's going on? And they were taken by the police. The police turned them over to a federal government agency, and they just disappeared. We never heard from them again, and I think that's most likely because they were returned to Israel. There are a lot of suspicions about. There are, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't follow as closely as you do. But there were supposedly workers that appeared several months before the towers went down, and this perhaps hundreds of workers, I don't know, in the towers, and they spoke with strange accents, is what we were told. And also some people say, well, you can't keep it quiet. It's something this big. Too many people have to know about it in order to keep it quiet. Well, there are organizations that specialize in keeping large plans like this quiet and covert. And the ones who specialize in covert activities are the intelligence agencies, like the CIA or the Mossad. Or the KGB, if you like, back in the days of the Soviet Union, and so, if the U.S. government didn't want the CIA to do it directly, they can always work with other agencies and get lots of people with foreign accents. But I'm just these are things that need to be studied and really investigated, and we need an intelligence agency that's capable of doing that, if you like. But we're not going to get one. We're going to have to do it ourselves, as you well know. So this is I think the evidence keeps coming out more, but it's not the evidence. The evidence can be silenced. The media can be controlled. The the narrative one narrative can be covered up and another and a fictitious one imposed upon it. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always entertained when I watch a movie about some conspiracy, and it all wraps up when somebody just gets the evidence to the news or to the president of the United States or to some congressman or whatever, and they look at it, they immediately believe it, and it gets blasted all over the airwaves, and the good guys win. Because in real life, that is not how it works. It doesn't matter how many people it took to bring down those towers on September 11th. If one of them decided a week later that they would come clean, they had a guilty conscience, who would they go to? Local law enforcement would think they were crazy. News media wouldn't cover them. Members of Congress would, just to dismiss them. Who would they actually go to with this? If the agenda is that we're not going to acknowledge this. And a lot of these agencies and, local law enforcement and everything on up to the president of the United States, they take their cues from what's publicly acceptable and presented on the television. The television is one of the most powerful members of our households. And if you don't have something acknowledged on that, a lot of people think they don't have permission to believe it. We got to do something about that in the psychology of this country, but that is the way it is right now. So it's not that hard to get away with things in the United States if you have the right people on your side. Most people believe just what they're told and do whatever that flickery blue box tells them. Getting back to Palestine, because I remember, I would hear about the issue growing up, but I never looked into it too deeply until I got involved in 9/11 Truth and started looking at other things. But I watched a film where they detailed some of the conditions that these people are living in these areas of land that are, kind of walled off and left for them, not very big. But because you're more of an expert on this, I'd like you to kind of go into it. Talk about the conditions that people in those territories live in and what they have to deal with every day.
Well, Israel, the objective of Israel is to make the Palestinians disappear. They want the territories that they control to be free. The ultimate goal is was stated by one of the earliest Zionists, was to make, as he put it, to make Palestine as Jewish as England is English, which at the time, that provided the image. But the point is that what they're aiming at is a society that it's basically a genocidal project to create a place which is predominantly, if not exclusively, of one, you can call it race if you like. I don't know how they would view themselves, but it's a subdivision of humanity that they want to be in total control and the only ones existing in that territory. And those are, in fact, I would go farther and say Jewish Zionists, because there are Jews that are excluded from being there because they're anti-Zionist. So they want those who will cooperate and help this project, and that's one of the reasons that that Israel is becoming more aggressive and more racist, and why the most extreme elements are dominating, because those extreme elements are the fighters that they need and want in order to achieve this project. Now, the result for the Palestinians, to get back to your question, is that their water is taken away from them. Although they're sitting on some of the biggest aquifers, let's say in Palestine, in the West Bank, the water is diverted, and they have to pay tankers to come in. They have to pay Jewish suppliers of water to bring in tankers by truck, and they have to survive on maybe 1/5 of the water that they had previously, or that is normal for that situation. They if they go from one place to another, they have to. There are checkpoints, kind of like showing your passport, every few kilometers or miles, and they're scattered all over. I believe they're close to 100 and maybe more in the West Bank. And they're denied equal rights. Their economy is put under stress. It's very difficult for Palestinians to manufacture anything, to grow anything, to practice normal commerce and this sort of thing. A very dear friend of mine, who may be familiar to a lot of the listeners, Ajamu Baraka, made a trip to Palestine. I believe it was, maybe 5 years ago. And he said he can't go back. He says not because the Israelis won't let him, although that's true for a lot of people who are critical of Israel. In his case, he said he just can't watch. He can't look at what's going on there. I mean, this is a man who has been all over the world, and he has seen some of the most terrible things, including going back to apartheid in South Africa. But he said, "I'm sorry, I can't go there. I can speak out about it. I can correspond about it, but I can't watch it. I can't watch it firsthand. It's horrible." And I have to agree, it is horrible.
Yes, it is. And I mean, people deserve dignity, and some of the stuff that I have watched, I mean, like I mentioned, John Pilger did a film about it, something with the soldiers the Israeli soldiers going into a nursery school and defecating on the toys. Absolutely unnecessary actions being done in the name of one state. And again, I don't have an opinion about religion, any of that stuff. I don't even really believe in it. But at the same time, you got to be able to treat people with dignity, respect, humanity, and that is not what's going on over there. And it is wrong. That's my personal opinion, not speaking for AE, just for Andy Steele. So I respect the heck out of people who try to do something to improve people's lives in situations like that. I have a friend who works with a charity that does things for kids in Palestine. Also, you were involved in the flotillas. I was following that, not expertly. I don't know every single detail. You'll be filling us in, but tell our audience about those efforts.
Yes. Well, at that time, this was in 2006, 2 years before the flotillas actually started. I was trying to go to Palestine, and I was expelled. But I wasn't the only activist that was being expelled. There were many others, and we didn't want to give up our activism. And we wanted to challenge Israel in some way, and we wanted to do it directly. And so 5 of us actually were corresponding mostly by email across various continents and so forth. And we came up with the idea to take boats, because after all, Gaza is directly on the Mediterranean Sea, so we wouldn't have to go through so-called Israel when we're banned, where we're banned, and where they wouldn't let us in. We could go directly into one part of Palestine, which is Gaza. So that's the origin of when we started to develop this. And we had a lot of very dedicated and very creative people who got together to make this happen, so that in 2008, August 23rd, I believe it was. In 2008, we finally put together two boats that had been built in total secrecy in Greece, rebuilt, I should say. And then there are so many adventures I could keep going for 2 hours on how we avoided being captured by the Greek authorities and by the Israeli authorities, and the various negotiations that took place. But finally, we gathered the two boats. We got the two boats to Cyprus, and from Cyprus we got the cooperation of the Cypriot authorities to astonishingly, really, to inspect our boats, to keep our boats in a part of the port away from the rest of the port, and to inspect even underneath the water on the hulls and everything that was on board. And they were able to assure everyone that nothing dangerous was happening there. And we sailed those to Gaza. It was an enormous event. There were thousands and thousands of people who gathered on the beaches of Gaza spontaneously, because nobody knew when we were going to get there. So it was a huge event, and it was a challenge to Israel. And I'm actually astonished that we achieved it. And I think we had a bit of luck along the way. Let's say our timing was such that the Israelis wanted to discourage us, but they didn't actually want to have to deal with arresting us at that time, because they had an attack planned for the end of the year in late December, which went forward. And after that, there were no boats that went through. But the one in eventually, after trying for the next 2 years, because the first boats were in 2008, we had the big flotilla, which happened in 2010 with 5 boats and lots of supplies for Gaza as well. Total of more than 700 people altogether on several ships participated in doing this, and it became a very big deal. So
now, I was told, and I've been shown a picture, and since this is a pre-recorded show, we'll be superimposing that over the image right now. But you were attacked during one of these adventures and beaten up pretty badly. So tell our audience about that.
Well, what happened to me pales by comparison to the 9 and ultimately 10 people who died in that action. But in my case, I have to say that I was a nuisance. It doesn't excuse the way they treated me, but they typically, as we were discussing earlier, they typically treat Palestinians much worse. I tried to resist. One of the things that I did was, on the boat that I was on, I avoided capture. While I was on the boat, I hid out, and everybody was asking, "Where's Paul?" and this sort of thing. So finally, I decided to come out of hiding, and they tied my hands, and but then they released everybody else on good behavior. So and I had actually. I used a trick, if you like, magician's trick, to have my hands bound in such a way that it was easy to take off the restraints, and then I decided to make a little bit more trouble, and so I asked the doctor, our doctor, to come over and take a look at me to see how I was. And I handed him all my documents and a lot of money actually that I had. And he took it and didn't know what I was going to do. What I did was I jumped over the side of the ship into the Mediterranean Sea. And so, I mean, they had lots of witnesses to what was going on. So whatever they did, they had to be. They couldn't let me. They couldn't let me just sit there. They had to stop the boat, and so it was sticking a wrench into the cogs of the machine. But after a naval boat came along to take over from the other boat that had all the passengers on it, then they were not so gentle, and they beat me into submission. Of course, I resisted that too. I actually didn't make it easy for them to pluck me from the sea. It was that's another interesting story. But and then when they took me to the port, I was, you could say, interrogated, but I didn't look at my interrogator. I didn't open my mouth. I let my body go limp to get me from one place to another. They either had to carry me or put me in a wheelchair, and so forth. And but yeah, they were not happy with me, and they made their unhappiness well known, and I ended up with a lot of bruises.
You know, I'm wondering what is the consequences? Like you said, you were lucky the first time, but what is the ultimate consequence somebody could face if the Israeli government doesn't want to deal with it anymore, if they decide to be as strict as possible? Now, you were beaten up. There was some backstory to that, but when people get on these flotillas, like, what is the greatest danger other than what could happen at sea, but that they face when they actually come into Palestine?
Well, if we're capped on the flotillas, when we were captured, we were you could say privileged. We're white people mostly, or black people, but we're not Palestinians. And the news is watching the whole time. They're watching fairly closely. So the Israelis don't want to go too far. They did actually go too far with the Turks, killing 9. Actually, eventually a 10th died also. And there was a lot of violence, but the story of the violence was suppressed. But nevertheless, with the Palestinians, they don't hold back. They just they're willing. There have been cases where Palestinians who say the wrong thing or insist on their rights and this sort of thing, they just get shot in the head. It happened. I'm thinking right now of an incident that happened in Hebron, and a young man just shot because they wanted to shoot him. But that's not unusual. They do it with children, and they're trying to they're using force. It's kind of like the mafia. They just do whatever is necessary to keep the people they control in line. So, and it's not a pretty sight. If you think of the worst things that Nazi Germany did, it hasn't reached the stage of gas chambers, but there are people in the military who say we should use gas chambers for the Palestinians. We need to kill them all. And an officer who's most likely, his name was withheld, but he gave an interview which was printed. And although not very much, we don't hear about it much anymore. But it was probably Ariel Sharon. And he said, you know, I would be happy to go to prison for the rest of my life, or to be executed, for if I could just kill 1 million or 2 million of these vermin that we want to get rid of. I mean, let's face it, it's a genocidal project, and this is what they have in mind. So.
Yeah, it's horrifying, and I can't. I mean, to me, it seems again that I said this on a previous show, that the number one goal, if you're presiding over any country, is that you want to maintain the peace. That requires a little bit of give and take, not to be believing that your group is better than another particular group destined to rule. You can get people to live together in some kind of harmony. Well, then you've succeeded in a way. But everything that you're describing here seems like it's going in the opposite direction. That it's creating disharmony, and it's really just aimed at one specific group. And of course, that is more than unfair. Now, we got about 10 minutes left. What we're trying to do is, obviously, our number one issue is the World Trade Center, but we're trying to use the World Trade Center evidence to try to impact the world today, to try to affect current events, because things are very scary right now. And a lot of people out there seem to be distracted by certain wedge issues, the culture war stuff, all of that. I try to look past that. I used to know a lot of different news sources. But in your view, what are the most critical issues taking place on this globe right now that are of the greatest importance to people and their futures here in the United States?
Okay. I thought you were going to say the world, but okay, we'll.
Well, the world as well. The world as well. We get a lot of American viewers on here, so I'm trying to address them.
Well, it's the one that's probably of primary importance to both the United States and the world. And the United States, because the United States is such a great player in it, is the war in Ukraine, because it is so dangerous. It is so. First of all, like most great conflicts, historic conflicts, there is so much disinformation that is happening around it. We get views that are distilled through our media, and we don't, as usual, we do not listen to the other side's point of view. We get only the point of view of one side. And because of that, the side that we listen to feels free to tell just as many lies as it cares to. And so the result is we are so unbelievably far removed from the truth. But Ukraine is not unique in that respect. It's just a bigger issue than some of the ones that we've just talked about Palestine, and what's happening in Palestine didn't just to begin. It's been there for a long time. It's only that we've come to know more about it because so many individuals went to Palestine and came back and are telling the story that now it's impossible to keep it as quiet as it was before. But in the case of Ukraine, the reason I say it's the most dangerous issue now is because you have some very important, you have nuclear powers involved. You have the US, you have Russia, and you have some, you could say minor European nuclear powers as well, although we don't expect them to use nuclear weapons. But basically what this boils down to is that the US has decided that Ukraine cannot lose. And Russia is unwilling to lose. They have said so. They said, we will use nuclear weapons if that's the only way we can preserve Russia. We're not going to be wiped off the map or controlled by somebody else. We'll use nuclear weapons before that happens. The United States, we have people like I don't know if some of your viewers might remember General Curtis LeMay in 1962 during the Cuban crisis, who said, "Let's use our nuclear weapons now. Let's do it. Let's destroy the Soviet Union. This is the best chance we'll have to do that." So there are people who are ready to do that. And so this is an existential issue, not just for Ukraine or for Russia, but for the rest of the world. And in a sense, we don't know enough as a people in the United States. We don't know enough in order to understand how dangerous it is, or to see the point of view of the other side, or even to make sense of the facts. So this is a very dangerous situation. We have to find a way of getting the truth through all the censorship that's happening to us. Americans are not aware of the degree of censorship, how some stories cannot be told in this country. And I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said, if I had to live in a country without a government or without newspapers, I would choose the former, or maybe the other way around. But that's not true anymore. The newspapers in Jefferson's day, I mean, anybody who had a printing press could print a newspaper and get it around by the means that were readily available at that time. It was difficult to suppress, and a lot of times they didn't have very much reason to do that. But today, I mean, every word that we're saying is being recorded and kept for posterity. And every time we trigger an electronic activity of some kind, that also gets put in an enormous electronic database in the Utah database in the Utah desert there. I mean, it goes on and on. It's recording all this is not necessarily sinister. I mean, there are credit card companies that record all kinds of information that are very revealing about our individual lives. But it's the way it's used, and when it's all put together for the purpose of manipulating us, we all have to be scared, and we need to think about what we're going to do to preserve our rights.
Exactly. And we're going to get into the censorship on the show pretty soon here, because there's some really disturbing things I've discovered on the internet, and it all relates back to our issue because we use the internet to get our message out. Sir, in our last minute here, and thank you so much for coming on today, tell us, because obviously the mainstream media has failed us, where do you get your news? What are some of the best news sources to follow world developments in your view, get that kind of mix of different views that you're talking about? And how can our audience follow you and even get involved in some of the work that you do if they're interested?
Well, it's not worth trying following me, because I'm not that active in like broadcasting or investigating or asking. But some of the organizations that I help and administer and that sort of thing. Yes, go to the Serena Shim Award that I've already mentioned, and the Syria Solidarity Movement, or the Syria Support Movement. It's two different names of the same organization. And Resumen Latinoamericano. In terms of how to find the information that you want, I don't pretend. We're relatively small, and I don't pretend to have exhaustive resources for people to use. But what I have done is, first of all, assume that anything that is produced by that is promoted as the main source by our society is one that I have to go and get the other side of the picture. And it requires investigation. For example, I was trying to find some things on Google some time ago, and I just couldn't find it. And I looked at other search engines. Finally, I went to Yandex, which is a private Russian source. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, everything that I was looking for, I was able to find. And there are Chinese sources and so forth. This is the thing. Go look. If you want to find news, the other side of the question, go to RT. It's online. It's some of these online groups are also banned. They may not have broadcasting privileges in the US or the UK, and they may not have staff in Washington, which they used to, and in London and in Paris, and they don't anymore. But there are, you can go and find. India is a good place to find excellent journalists who present various sides of issues. But we have our own groups here, and you can go to Serena Shim Award and see the list of more than 50 names there, including Ajamu Baraka and the Black Agenda Report and a variety of journalists who are doing wonderful jobs. What can I say? Anyway, this is what I recommend. Look for your opponent. Look for what the ones that are considered our enemy here, generally considered our enemy. Find out what they're saying. Maybe you'll find out that what we're saying is absolutely true. What our government is saying is absolutely true. But you don't know until you check out what they're saying as well. And it's likely to inform your opinion. We're supposed to pride ourselves on listening to both sides of the question, and we ostensibly do that. Our justice system is built on that adversarial procedure, where we listen to what both sides have to say and what they want to present. Well, we have to do that for ourselves, because nobody's going to do it for us.
Those are excellent words to end it on, and great advice. Don't worry about being part of a faction and defending your team. Think for yourself and be an individual out there. Paul, thank you so much for all the work you've done in your activist career and for coming on 9/11 Freefall today.
Thanks. Thank you, Andy, for all you do. And it's been a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.